Welcome, audience, to DRASInt Risk podcast. Today, we have with us Ms. Ruchika Gupta, a forensic psychologist and a mental health advocate. Ms. Gupta is passionate about merging mental health with justice system. She holds a master's in forensic psychology with extensive experience in forensic science labs at both the central and the state levels. Ms. Gupta has also been trained as a forensic expert at the Central Forensic Lab of the CBI and is a specialist in a variety of forensic techniques, including polygraph administration and eye detect. Alongside her hands on experience, she is a researcher with international recognition for her studies in cognition, hypnosis, and identity development with developmental psychology. Today, we'll be diving deep into the Posh Act of 2013, its history, implementation, and challenges. Let's begin with the first topic. Welcome, Ms. Ruchika.
Thank you so much, sir. It's good to be here.
Yes, it's a pleasure have you back again with us. Ms. Gupta, could you please explain the importance of Posh Act and its role in preventing, prohibiting, and readdressing sexual harassment at the workplace? How does it address not just the physical but also the mental and the emotional harassment?
Thank you, Mr. Amit. So, if you talk about the Posh Act of 2013, it was definitely a landmark piece of legislation as it aimed at providing safe working culture for women by protecting them against any form of sexual harassment. It actually mandated the employers to make and alter their policies in such a way that they can prevent any sort of sexual harassment taking place with any of its employees in the company, organization, or their particular industry. It actually also mandated them to create and form such internal committees where they can address, acknowledge, and provide appropriate relief to the victims of the same. So, I think it is very important to mention here that when we talk about the term harassment, it has various components: mental, emotional, and physical. So, it is important to mention here about its component because when we talk about POSH, it differs variably from the sections or the provisions of IPC, which is section 354, and I think it's section 509, which talks about the physical actions relating to sexual harassment. But about POSH, it covers a broader spectrum, which takes into place unwelcome activities, gestures, desires, favors, which are uncomfortable and sexual in nature and is perpetrated against the women employees in a company. I would like to mention here that when you talk about harassment, so harassment is a form of abuse that takes place in such a relationship or such a dynamic where sociologically there is this one party which is less powerful and then there is this another party which is more powerful, and this dynamic, this relationship is maintained in such a way that the power with like the party with the less power knows that they're less powerful than the more powerful one, and with time what happens is that the more powerful party learns to get away with doing minimal or doing the wrongful act against the second or the less powerful party. So if we take into respect this lens of power and we think about the global human community, we will find out that the most vulnerable and the least powerful group is that of children. So with time, India has also taken the same path. So its first components in the law related to the term harassment came out to be the part of the POXO Act, which is prevention of children from any form of sexual offenses or sexual harassment. So the second one or the second group that was found out to be more vulnerable were the women. So, proportionately, according to the data, information, and records throughout the decades, it has been found that the second most vulnerable population is women. And that is why the POSH Act, to prevent the women from facing any sort of sexual harassment at workplaces, came about to be established in our law, that is in 2013. I think it's a fact that we all should know that when we are not able to provide remedy or hinder, it hinder any form of sexual harassment or sexual abuse taking place against any person, and we are not able to stop it. It's actually taking away their fundamental rights. For example, the Article 14, which talks about the right to equality, Article 15, which talks about right against any gender discrimination. It also hinders Article 21, the fundamental right given in Article 21, which is the right to dignity, and of course the right to engage in any profession, business or trade in a safe manner. So I think these are the things that we need to know when we talk about the basics of the Posh.
Yeah, that's a great point about the broader scope of the Posh Act. Now let's move on to the timeline leading to the Posh Act. Ms. Gupta, could you walk us through some of the key cases that led to the formation of this act?
Yes, definitely. There was this case of Bhanwari Devi. So Bhanwari Devi's case was like a turning point in women rights in India. So Bhanwari Devi was a social worker. She was a government employee, in fact, who was working in the state of Rajasthan against this practice of child marriage. But unfortunately, in her line of duty, she was being gang raped by the same people of that same village where she tried to stop this practice. This incident was the highlighting point, which came about to be later be put in form of preventing harassment for women against women in the Posh Act, and this was the guiding case. It actually highlighted the lack of legal provisions addressing any sexual harassment taking place against women in different settings. And these acts are being done just to devoid the woman. That is the worst part, that it is being done just so to devoid them of their authority, image, and basic position. Coming back to how Posh Act came about to be. So it was in 1997 when Supreme Court actually intervened and laid out the Vishakha Guidelines. So Vishakha Guidelines had 6 major points. First of all, it redefined sexual harassment. Like I said before, in the IPC, it was the actions that led to sexual harassment of a woman that was mentioned, but in the Vishakha guidelines, it was put that even unwelcome gestures, behaviors, or any sort of physical contact, or even sexually colored remarks could be a part of sexual harassment. Second was the preventive measures, where employers were suggested that they need to make the work environment more inclusive and gender equal. Third was the setting up of complaints committee. There, as of now, there are two types of complaint committee. There is this internal complaints committee, and then there is local complaints committee. Now it's called internal committee because it's been thought that it's not just about the complaints, but it's also about spreading the awareness, which is one of the duties of the internal committees, of course. These complaints committees were supposed to acknowledge the complaints and provide the appropriate relief to the victims. Then the fourth point was the confidentiality, that the details of the case, of the people involved in the case, whether it is victim, witness, or accused, or the suspect, they all have to have their confidentiality intact, and their details are not to be mentioned outside, not even in the organization settings from one employee to another. There was this fifth point which talked about the actions against the harasser. So there has to be appropriate action according to the Supreme Court against the perpetrator in terms of warning and, if required, termination. The fifth and the most important point, which talks about prevention, is creating awareness programs, routinely awareness programs to educate the employees about sexual harassment and available mechanisms to all the employees, especially the female employees who could be suffering with any form of abuse or harassment, sexual in nature, or even if it is not sexual, they could actually reach out to that particular committee with any form of complaints while feeling safe and being heard. So it was in 2013 when Posh Act finally came about. But before that as well, in 2012, there was this another case of this journalist whose name was Medha Kotwal. And I think these two cases, the case of Bhanwari Devi and Medha Kotwal, were the two case studies which actually formed about the Posh Act and are the guiding ones which led to the creation of it.
Oh, that's a powerful overview of the timeline. Could you
Yeah.
explain some of the key elements of the Act, such as the key definitions and the committees, as you were suggesting, involved in the functioning of the Act?
Yeah, so I think the most important elements of this act are its definitions of sexual harassment, employer, what constitutes an employer, what is an employee, and also the aggrieved women. So when we talk about the definition of sexual harassment, it includes but is not limited to one or more form of unwelcome acts or behavior, whether directly or in an implied nature, that results in any uncomfortable physical contacts or advances by a person, a demand or request of any sort of sexual favors. It also contains showing any form of pornography, and as a residuary point, it also includes any unwelcome physical, verbal, or non-verbal conduct of sexual nature being done by one employee to another. It also includes the fact that it could be one employee to another or from the side of an employer to an employee. Right. So when we talk about the definition for employee, I would like to let you know that it's actually very comprehensive as given in the act, but to make it more clear, concise to the audience, I would like to give a certain terminology that can help in defining the word employee. So, an employee could be a regular or a or on temporary basis. The employee could be on a daily wage, directly employed or through an agent. The employee could be contractual, could be on a probationary basis. The employee could be a trainee or an apprentice, or could be working on a voluntary or non-voluntary basis, whether they are taking the remuneration or not. So this was about the employee, and this particular employee could be working in the formal or the informal setting. So when we talk about the informal setting, it's about the dwelling settings. So dwelling houses or dwelling settings are the domestic uh, households where domestic workers are employed in form of women being nurses, women being nanny or caretakers, or it could be anything. So those are the informal settings. Again, then there is employer. Who is an employer? An employer could be the owner of the company, the head of the company, or an HOD. Anyone who actually is the head of a department, organization, establishment, enterprise, institution, offices, undertakings, branch unit being set on a government level or on a private basis. And about the aggrieved women could be anyone who is employed by the office or isn't employed by the office but is in a particular workplace setting when a particular act is done against her. So let's say, if I give you an example, there's this woman A who enters a workplace B for some work, like delivering a package, delivering a message, or even for a small temporary meeting. So in case something happens to her which is sexual in nature by employee of the company or maybe the employer himself, that woman and her complaint has to be dealt by the internal complaints committee of that particular organization and its members. So it is also important to note here that it's not just the IC that comes into power of dealing with such complaints. It's also the LC, that is the local committee. So the basic difference between IC and LC is that IC is more internal in nature. So IC is being formed by the employer inside the organization, and it constitutes of mainly four people, which are from the organization itself. One of it is the presiding officer, of course, who has to be the woman. And the special part about these four members is that all of them are supposed to be the ones who work or are interested or have had experience of programs or education related to women upliftment programs, women empowerment programs, or are currently functional in anything that is related to protection of women rights. Okay, and like I said, the basic difference between these two are that if an organization has more than 10 employees, it will definitely has to have an IC, that is internal committee. And in case it's a small organization, for example like a startup which has less than 10 members, uh, those cases are being dealt by the LC. So LC has two basic functions. First, to deal with the complaints of the organizations or the companies where the employee number is less than 10, or if the complaint is against the employer or the head or the owner of the company itself, so it is being dealt on the district level. So when we talk about the LC, it is being you know implemented, it's being uh, taken into respect by the district officer, and district officer is being appointed by the appropriate government. So when we talk about the fact of appropriate government, what is an appropriate government? Appropriate government is the state government or the central government who's taking into respect the basic criterions related to the basic rules and program that needs to be functional in that particular area, district, or a. I think that were the basic elements that we need to remember when we talk and we learn about the Posh Act.
Great. That's a thorough breakdown of the key elements. But critique says that the Posh Act has some missing criteria, and there's a need for more flexibility in its enforcement. Can you tell us more about this particular aspect, Ms. Gupta?
Okay, so Mr. Amit, when we talk about the common criticisms that we hear about the Posh Act, it is about the gender neutrality, that it is not gender neutral or gender inclusive. But in fact, if you come to read the entire name of this act, you will find this term preventive in it. So it's the entire essence of the act that it includes the word preventive, which actually makes the employer more free, in a sense that employers can actually include a gender inclusive policy on their personal levels in the particular organization. So I think the best possible way to do that would be at the beginning of any employment itself, that they can include a gender inclusive you know a rule or a norm that every employee has to respect the privacy, proximity, and the basic dignity of another employee, irrespective of the fact that the other person is a male or a female. So that could be in fact added in the employment contract itself before the person gets into the company. So that is one way an employer can make it more gender inclusive, apart from mandatory establishment of the Posh policy. Then again, second part I think is that we need to remember, then when we talk about the components of the act, we talk about the aggrieved women. So aggrieved women are the victim, right? So the victim has to be an aggrieved woman, but the perpetrator, but the suspect, the accused could be anyone. So the repercussions of any uncomfortable conduct or any inappropriate activity would be same, even if the perpetrator is a male or a female. So you see, you can find gender inclusivity in the act. In certain aspects, it is progressive. The act it's progressive, but still it's on the updating level. But coming back to the criticisms, I think, in my opinion, the basic problem is the stigma that still resides in the hearts, minds, and souls of women. That they still find themselves unresolved with the fact that they have to live with this tag of being a victim of sexual harassment. You might be aware of this very common practice that is, prevalent in the society of victim blaming. So that victim blaming and shaming persists because of the fact that this sensitive power dynamics of patriarchy still exist, although such development and global advancements are taking place in the society. So that is a sad part. And I think that is a criticism, that is a pawn that we should work on a whole, on a society level. So if we talk about the criticisms of the Posh, it's, I think, more about small organizations which are, in requirement of awareness, which are in requirement of strict regulations, because despite the law, they do not, employ proper trainings or awareness. Neither do they implement the said things as efficiently on the practical basis as they do it on the paper. They handle the cases in such a that sense that, they will reconcile the parties on merely an HR level, leave apart establishing any community or any internal committees, in fact. It takes place in a way that there are informal apologies, then comes the compensations, and the case is resolved like that.
Yeah.
But it does not cover the fact that how it is affecting the mentality, the emotional stability of that very victim or the survivor who has to stay in that hostile environment even after the compensation or an informal apology has taken place. So there is no resolution for that on a foundational level. Another criticism is that although this act has, established mandatory policies in the community, in the organizations, in the industries, still, there is lack of awareness among the real victims. And here, right now, in today's time, we are finding more cases which are malicious in nature. So you could call them the fake cases. And because of these fake cases, the problem is being faced by the real victim, and such that, their complaints are not making sense, and their complaints are not finding enough grounds to be taken seriously at most of the places or by the employers. So uh, all in all, I think for the act to be effective, there needs to be more flexibility with the coming time so that it can adapt to different scenarios, industries, and organizational structures. Though, like I said, the act is progressing, it needs a lot of updation, and uh, it's also on the fact that inclusivity, I think, will come with time. There was this case of 2018 I would like to mention here. It was that of Anamika versus the Union of India. So the importance of this case was that Anamika was a this person was a trans person who was not a cis female, not a female by birth, but identified themselves as a female. So, although there were many controversies, many people who were against this fact or this, very information that that person merely identified themselves as a woman, but was not a woman. But still, the case was dealt in accordance with the POSH policy. So you see, inclusivity is happening with time. It is slow, but with time, it will definitely take place. So coming back to the fact that it is very important that we sensitize our employees, we sensitize our people regarding the consequences of sexual harassment. Because, when these things happen to a person, by the people they trust and they talk to, they see or they hear every day, it's not as easily forgiven or forgotten as is perceived by many. Because in a society like ours, where, a collectivistic culture still exists and seeks to further develop, there are people who live merely to live for their family and to build a respectful stand in the society. And as for women, to protect themselves from the hands of a perpetrator of any form of abuse these days, as it was 10 years back, it's a chore. It's a chore that they need to fulfill in one setting or another. And also, I would like to mention here that Researchers have proven that the most common manifestation of sexual harassment is gender harassment, which is rooted in contempt. So, all of this literature actually reflects that the societal attitudes and the biases that devalue certain gender and category merely on the basis of power dynamics is very wrong, and thus it requires a lot of progressive change.
Those were significant points. Well covered up. Moving on, you've already mentioned the importance of maintaining respectful language and etiquettes at the workplace. Could you elaborate a bit more on why this is so critical for creating a safer environment?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Amit. So I think creating a culture of respect at a workplace is vital. It's very crucial in nature because it's not just about the compliance with the law, but it's also about ingraining the values that contribute to a healthy and a productive work environment. Simple gestures like ensuring respectful communication, respecting boundaries, the proximity, and the basic use of appropriate language, even that is verbal or non-verbal in nature, can prevent a lot of potential conflicts in a dynamic or in a relationship where there is, possibilities of misunderstandings otherwise. So, in fact, organization can focus on respect and inclusivity so that in time, their employees can feel more safe, inclusive, secure, and actually give about in sense of being more efficient and productive for themselves as well as for the company.
Great insights again. Could you share your thoughts on workplace safety hazards and how organizations can ensure the safety and well-being of their employees, particularly in relation to the Posh Act?
Okay. So, when we talk about the workplace safety, so workplace safety, I think, is not limited to merely physical hazards like faulty equipments or unsafe working conditions, but it also could be extended to emotional or psychological safety of an employee in a way that although the POSH Act plays a very key role in addressing such issues, employers could go beyond those minimum requirements in a way that they could invest more in regular trainings, workshops, making clear policies in their workplaces, and of course, ensuring a zero tolerance policies or approach to any form of harassment taking place against any employee any person who is working for the organization or even in the nearabouts of the organization on a temporary basis or on a permanent one. So it's about creating an environment where employees can feel safe to reach out to seek any form of help or to report an issue without any fear of retaliation or any misconduct being happening to them just because they were there to voice out their problems.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you so much for your time and valuable insight, Ms. Gupta. Before we wrap up, let me throw a few quick questions that we have collected from the audience. What would you say is the biggest challenge in enforcing the POSH Act at workplaces?
Okay, so I think before mentioning the biggest challenge, I think on a whole, on a level of maintaining a community, I think the most important thing is to aware the victim about the fact that any form of assistance, be it emotional, mental, or physical, is available to them, even if they don't have people to call friends. They would definitely have people in their community who empathize with their situations. But then there's this another factor that comes into play, which is that of the malicious reports or the fake cases. So, like I mentioned before, because of such malicious reports or fake cases, many of the victims' voices go unheard. And even if people try to help them out, there are further other people in the authority itself who have had bad experiences related to the same cases or might have involved in the similar cause in their previous experience, but now they are forced mentally or emotionally to project the same feelings on this particular person who might actually be the victim and is not faking it just for the purpose of any material gain. So
Yeah.
I think the part of you know differing the malicious report from that of an appropriate report becomes difficult on an authority level when the organizations are bigger and not smaller, and are widespread in different units and different blocks across the country or maybe across the country. So apart from that, there's this another thing. I think that many employees, especially in smaller companies or lesser educated sectors, are unaware of what actually constitutes in the term harassment. That's why they're not even aware about the rights that they might have under the law. So
Okay.
that is also another problem, like I mentioned initially, that awareness on the part of people is very important. It's crucial, in fact. So, apart from this awareness thing, there is also non-compliance of the law on the practical levels by the small companies, because they merely establish such policies on the paper like a checkbox activity or checkbox exercise, but do not have a serious commitment into creating a safe environment, which needs to change in order to make their environment of the company more efficient and productive for all the employees and all the people who are there.
Yes, yes, absolutely interesting. And how does this forensic psychology in which you specialize play a role in sexual harassment cases at the workplace?
So, you see, for a forensic psychologist, their working area is quite widespread. So, if we talk about a forensic psychologist working as a victimologist, they can help assess a criminal's personality profile alongside assessing the mental and emotional impact of harassment taking place on the victim's end. They could also assess professionally into the veracity of witness testimony. They could also take part in interviews or interrogations related to the suspects or where accused are involved for such cases. Because on an individual level, on a personal level, where a person really do not have an expertise in dealing with victims, accused, suspects, who could have, a very differing feelings, a very differing nature of complaints or remarks in their head rather than a normal person. So, actually differentiating a mental emotional state of a normal person and dealing with the mental emotional state of a person who is accused or who is a victim in a particular cause, in a particular case, is very demanding and very dynamic in nature, which could only be handled by a professional. So when you talk about forensic psychologists, they can also assist in evaluating the credibility of the witness. Like I told, the veracity word. So here we can also use the credibility of a witness, or the credibility of the victim, in fact, could be assessed more professionally by observing certain interviews, by conducting certain activities, or even questionnaires that we use using psychometric tools so as to better understand the dynamics that are involved in the case.
Yeah, that's really insightful. And how can the companies educate employees about mental and emotional harassment, which often goes unnoticed?
Okay. So there are many things that a company could do on a formal level as well as on the informal level. So first of all, I think it is very important that companies alter their conduct policy so as to make it more inclusive of all the genders and that it is gender neutral, apart from being independently establishing Posh policies which are actually mandated by the law. So that was the first thing. Apart from that, definitely there are other activities that could, be taken place on the level of companies where they create routinely awareness programs for their employees that goes just about or above the legal compliances. They should actually focus on creating more open dialogue platforms and workshops that works around emotional intelligence. They should work around mindfulness, what are safety and security, norms, what are the safety and security rules or basics for any employee or any person who is working outside their workplace work settings, because these days hybrid system is working where people are working from home as well as from their offices. So work dynamics and relationships, it changes whether the people are same beyond the screen or in person, but relationships or the work dynamics change when a person is working from home or that in the office. So the awareness programs, the workshop, the seminars should be conducted in a way that it is inclusive of all types of work environment. So all of this through an experienced professional can make a change, because they can narrate real life case studies, they can involve your people, your employees into such activities that could provide for clear examples and can help employees to recognize even subtle forms of harassment or abuse or misconduct that is taking place against them. It will also allow them to learn how to report them and to stand up for themselves. And if it is not happening to themselves, they can actually be more sensitive and they can be more acknowledging towards people who are experiencing it but do not find enough strength to actually go about and report it to the authorities. So
Yeah,
if one can't sympathize, they can, with the awareness programs and involved activities, learn to empathize with the person's situation.
absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Gupta. It was a pleasure having you here today. Your perspectives are quite valuable, and I'm sure our audience would have learned a lot.
Thank you so much, Mr. Amit. It was pleasure being here and discussing these important issues with you. But in the last, even I want to hope that we can continue working towards making this environment or this human society more safer and respectful for all of us.
Thank you once again, Ms. Gupta, for your for insightful answers and for shedding light on the importance of creating safe and respectful workplace. Your expertise is invaluable, and we are grateful for your time today. Thank you, audience, for joining us on the episode of DRASInt podcast. Stay safe, stay informed, and have a great day ahead. Thank you so much.